and welcome to our meetup. Today, Jay and Eric are going to be taking us through behavioral AI and discussing a step beyond that, looking at this new space of AI-powered customer engagement, which is interaction science. They'll be looking at how ecosystem AI has combined technology with human behavioral understanding. So before we begin, I just want to say that this meetup is being recorded and the recording will be posted online afterwards. If anyone has any questions, please drop them in the chat or raise your hand. I will be monitoring the chat throughout. So yeah, with that being said, I'm going to hand over to Jay and Eric.
Cool. Thanks, Madison. So yeah, Jay and I will be talking about behavioral interaction science, more into the science side of things. We do have a couple of slides to talk through, but if anyone has any questions or any comments, please shout and we can dig into different areas in more detail. So let me just share my screen. Some slides. Cool. So we thought a good, there's been a couple of sessions around interaction science-based concepts recently. We thought we would give a summary of the use cases that can use interaction science, just to give everyone a kind of practical idea of where it applies. Then we'll talk through some of the social constructs that we use in the interaction science space. And then in a view of going more into the science, we'll talk about the actual process and reasoning behind building out some of those constructs, specifically the personality metrics, how those are built and defined. And we'll also talk about experimentation, the sciencey part of understanding human behavior. And that's the plan of what we're going to chat about today. If we get through all of it, so we can pause and chat about any parts of it in more detail if anyone has any particular section they're very interested in. It would be useful just to chat about what are the cases or types of engagement where you would use interaction science. It's about interacting with humans, the human in your system. That can happen in the context of knowing your customer, personalizing your interactions with them, making sure that your interactions are in the moment, so making sure that you kind of take into account their context, situation, and social state at that point in time, enabling campaigns, and then maintaining your existing relationships with them. In terms of knowing or better understanding your customers, you can run kind of experiments where you vary the interaction options that they have based on how they engage with you. So banners, messages, buttons, kind of the way that you engage with people and learn from how they interact with you. You can then, in terms of personalizing things with hyper-personalized offers and products and next best actions, you can use your kind of knowledge of their behavioral social science constructs and experiments to best learn their preferences. You can make sure when you're doing in the moment interactions that you, like we said, use that in the moment information to best enable your your engagements with them, whether that be inbound or outbound. You can enable campaigns by kind of experimenting with language, so different messaging constructs for different types of social constructs, like personalities. You could have different messages for different personalities. And you can kind of maintain your relationship with your existing customers by having call to action experiments where you engage with them in order to nudge them to interact with you in ways that you can see lead to sustaining a healthy relationship with them. So it kind of spans the customer engagement lifecycle, the places you would use interaction science, and the ways that you can use it. So it's everything from, your first engagement with your customer, where you like onboarding them and learning about them, or even when you're starting to market to them, before you know too much about them and you're running your mass engagement experiments, to your journey option experiments when you're onboarding them, learning their preferences, understanding how best to talk to them with language, and then maintaining that existing relationship. So it's kind of across the way that the journey of, or the life cycle of how you would engage with your customer.
Eric, it is worth noting for everybody is that the intersection of the scientific research is normally done around human-computer interface. So that means human to glass, human to human, human to voice. Those are all relevant in this end-to-end conversation. So that means that what you're trying to do is to match the right approach to the stage. And today, obviously, we're only going to cover a handful of those constructs, but we continuously trying to find better ways to figure out, as an example, if a person gets a message or they are busy searching for some kind of product, well, language and everything is used, like Eric just said, you want to be able to use different behavioral theories and then run experiments to test those continuously. And that's why you will have a whole portfolio of theory that gets matched onto your technological platform to deploy this.
Cool. Thanks, Jay. I don't know if anyone else has any comments or questions or anything before we move on into some of the constructs that we use to enable this. Okay, cool. So yeah, into some of the constructs, and I think this is just a kind of saying that we quite like and identify with, that life happens in the moment, not in batches, and that means a lot of things. One, understand the moment that your customer is in, and be able to engage with them in that moment, rather than based on something that you have to run in batch once a week based on what they looked like in the previous month. And part of that understanding in the moment is having the right social constructs in place to enable and inform and enhance that understanding. And some of those constructs that we use are kind of personality based, so we'll talk about a couple here at a high level, and then, like I said, the kind of detail we'll go into is how we actually define these. So the one that I think we've been speaking about quite regularly over the last few weeks is the friend personality. So that's looking at more transactions with the financial institution, and using those transactions to determine your personality of engagement with that institution. So it's not meant to be, we can figure out your actual personality as a human being, but it is an indication of your the way you see your relationship with that organization and how you engage with them. So we split those into enthusiastic, industrious, intentional, and experiential, and then there's two kind of meta categories of introvert and extrovert, and you receive kind of a spectrum measure across each of those categories that can then be used to inform how the bank engages with you. So as a kind of basic example, the wording you can use to talk to people about the same thing. If you target that wording based on someone's personality of engagement with you, we've seen it be much more effective in driving the engagements that you're looking for. And you can do the same thing for any sort of interaction that you're having with people. The second one is around sentimental equilibrium and relationship dynamics. So it's actually based on a paper about human and particularly marital relationships and how those deteriorate or not over time. Basically around inattention and rupture points, and making sure that you can intervene at the right moment, and how conversely you can maintain a stable and long-term relationship. So we use a similar construct to consider customers' engagements with other organizations beyond other people. And then another time, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I think that the thing to note here is that we search behavioral science theories across a multitude of different disciplines. And when we find that somebody has performed a useful piece of behavioral research that we know that is repeatable and implementable in a technological platform, we normally run tests on the back of that to see if we can apply it in a context of a certain case. Where in this case, what it's showing is that when humans engage with various technological platforms to get to the product of choice, the service of choice, they essentially have a certain feeling and a certain experience that they kind of, especially over a period of time, will develop in the context of, let's say, a brand or a certain service. And there's a certain amount of effort that they'll put into to make sure that they do get that satisfactory or that kind of happiness quotient that is needed for them to be engaging with that particular environment. And what we're trying to find is, if you have to think about how you communicate with people, what we're trying to find is an equilibrium to say that if one person wants to be spoken to more often, more frequently, more consistently, and somebody that needs to be nudged all the time to take action versus another person that is not so interested in that, can you have an algorithm that can dynamically adjust itself based on those individual pieces of behavior, and how you get it to do that? And that means that finding the equilibrium eventually is something that is highly personalized and highly individual. And yeah, the point is just that we use these alternative theories and then implement those in tools so that you can add it to your experimentation repertoire or portfolio, so that you can get better understanding of how humans behave.
Thanks, Jay. So the next sort of construct, just to give another third example, is the interaction personality. So for that, we look at how you engage with a company's digital platform. So take an app, for example. Are you and people's kind of way they engage with things can change based on the moment that they're in. So are you very intentional and habit-based, and you kind of in a space where you're wanting to go in and get something done as quickly and efficiently as possible, and then leave again? Or are you more experiential, where you're looking around and kind of investigating new things that are appearing, and kind of open to hearing about things that aren't necessarily on your critical path of engaging with this app? So you can see, as an example, for an intentional customer, it's very much kind of come in, navigate as efficiently as possible, complete action, leave. Where an experiential customer, in contrast, would be coming in and out, and sometimes coming in and not actually completing an action, just looking around, and then coming in and doing some actions and those sorts of things. And enthusiastic is kind of the then extreme version of that, where they're very engaged and exploratory with the environment. So there's a lot more detail behind it, but given that this isn't an interaction personality session, we'll also just say at kind of a high level, the idea is you define a kind of metrics across those same those same personality measures based on, instead of someone's financial transactions, their digital transactions with you. So the measures of kind of the indications of their relationship that they leave with you in their digital engagement footprint. So I think in terms of to kind of talk about what the meetup was about, of the science behind interaction science, we thought it'd be interesting to talk about how we define and configure some of those personality metrics. So we spoke about the spend and interaction personality, and we have a couple of others based on for different industries that we work in, and it's a kind of multidisciplinary art/science process. So it needs a mix of expertise in psychology, computational social science, data analysis, kind of all brought together. So I think in the team we have, I think everyone has kind of a mix of those backgrounds with strengths in different areas. So we have Jess, who's our kind of psychologist, who's also, after working in this company for quite a while, gotten quite good at the data analysis, and Jay, the computational social scientist, also across all three, and me on the data side. So requires bringing together expertise from those three areas, and the idea is to start with a base social construct, and then use our core hypothesis is that the interactions that a customer has with a company contain the information that you need to understand their relationship with that company. So sometimes, and that is because the environments we normally in are those where people engage regularly with their clients. So if it's something like life insurance, where you buy it once and then potentially never talk to them again because you pass away before you claim, then that's less the case, and these metrics are less applicable. But for most kind of financial services like banking, telcos, kind of medical aid, short-term insurance, retail, in all of those cases, kind of our hypothesis is that interaction, that trail of interaction data that someone leaves with a company it contains within it the information needed to understand your relationship with that company. And what we do then is use these kind of fields of expertise to define indicators of that engagement or that relationship, what the state of that relationship and your personality with that company, and then take those indicators and map them onto a personality construct, and then define a set of algorithms to map people onto that personality construct, then based on their data and indicators. So have some, like as a kind of very high level example, if you're looking at interactions that have a graph structure, so spend is one of the ones that fits into this, because you can link transactions to multiple categories and then people to multiple transactions. If you look at the centralities of the different categories in someone's spend network, you can use those as indicators of behavior and then map those indicators onto a spend personality. So like I said, in our case, we have experiential, intentional, industrious, enthusiastic, introvert, extrovert as our categories. And you can use like I said, the centralities of how someone spends in order to map them onto a spectrum in each of those transactions. And to do that, you need to look at individuals data and then the kind of the populations level data to see how individuals compare to the population, and then run experiments to see how people with different indicators in the social construct you've defined react, and check that those kind of reactions match to your hypothesis of the construct that you've defined, and kind of go through that iterative process. So I think before we've had people who expect it to just be almost like a traditional like machine learning training exercise where we have a target variable that is the personality that just comes from I guess one way you could do it is do an actual give people a prize to do an actual personality survey and then train a model to predict people's personality based on the results of that survey. And it is something actually some of us have experimented with over the years, and it's a lot less effective than, in our experience, in kind of defining a social construct specific to that its situation and environment. So rather than just trying to figure out someone's Myers-Briggs personality from information that doesn't really contain, from data that doesn't really contain the information you need to do that. And in any case, the Myers-Briggs is less relevant to how you engage with your bank in any case. We found it to be much more effective to use this approach of defining a construct and mapping it to the data. But it is then, and that's why we say it's this multidisciplinary thing that is outside of, or like bigger than the traditional kind of data science approach of, target variable, train a deep learning model, and see the results. And that is definitely part of it, but it's important to have the rest of it there. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Maybe the thing worth noting for everybody is that there's a big question we get asked all the time. Can't you just do all of this stuff in a generative model, because it can just generate the output for you if you give it an input? And the challenge is that you need a reliable spectrum score that can be produced based on explainable methods. So if it's just linguistically useful, then sure, you can feed this into a language model or any kind of generative-based model to produce outputs for you. But if you want to reliably score a person based on your initial core hypothesis that you've designed around the fact that common behaviors of people fit within a certain spectrum. So if you use Carl Jung's, or any one of the concepts that we use around, let's say, archetypal-based research. Archetypal research means that you can collect a handful of attributes and you can score people on a spectrum on those attributes, and you can reliably produce the same result again and again and again. So that if you decide to define some kind of feedback or product offers or any interactions or use of certain color or certain language, whatever that might be, that is downstream part of your interactions output, you want to make sure that it's reliably the same. And that's why we believe that the two worlds live kind of in parallel, the world of making sure that it's repeatable, and that those centralities that Eric was talking about, if you get a lot of closeness around somebody spending a lot of money on travel and experiential related actions compared to somebody that spends it on essential and food and certain other kind of categories, those bits of evidence provide input into you making a certain decision. You want to make sure that it is repeatable again, so that you have a kind of a reliable way in which you're going to design your interactions, and then you can apply the more loosely coupled or more freely formed approaches to then come together with the scores that you have created that are very reliable and consistent. So the idea is that in our kind of research behavioral science, like Eric was saying, we do years of testing and we're continuously calibrating models that we know that are repeatable based on human traits, that you then add additional evidence and use cases and concepts to the base method that you then constructed off an evidence base. Yeah, I think this might be useful just to make sure.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So another example of kind of finding those indicators and mapping that to two personalities, and this is used in the the interaction personality construct is in people's transactions, trails of transactions with you. You can build out indicators of habitual behavior, action planning, interaction reactions, participation, eagerness. So, you can see these are indicators that we've defined. So, what is your consistency of action, and how's that both in kind of action and timing? Do you plan your time well? So, you do things regularly, but do you often kind of get interrupted and have to leave and come back? How do you engage with reactions with us? How do you respond to new things and being offered information? So those are some examples of kind of the first step that we'd have of take data, find in that data indications of human behavior, and then map that onto your personality construct. So based on how you behave across those different metrics, you then get given a spectrum score across the different those different personalities of intentional, experiential, enthusiastic, industrious, because we've done the work to map those categories to the indicators that we find. So the same thing as what we were talking about with the spend, where you have kind of clusters of spending that get mapped to personality. Here you have kind of indicators of how you're behaving as a person in this digital environment that get mapped to the personality that can then be used to inform engagements with you. So yeah, that's kind of at a kind of necessarily high level how we define the personality construct. It's an interesting one because it's so, like I say, it's a mix of art and science. There's not really a this is the formula for defining it. There's a kind of process that you need to follow, that we follow, but it relies on a bit of art to define it and then verify it and confirm it and enrich it with the science part of it. So any questions or anything on that before I move on? Cool. So the last thing that we prepared to talk about is then experimentation. Then we'll then talk about how that feeds or interacts with the social constructs that we were talking about, and how you use them together, and how they can kind of reinforce each other and enhance the value that you get. So experimentation is kind of quite a broad term. I think the traditional version of it, at least in the environment that we are interested in and talking about, is kind of traditional A/B testing, where you have two options and you want to see which one is best. So you randomly present one option to some people and another to other people, and you use that and a bunch of statistics to determine is one option better than another, and by how much. And even that does give you a lot of insight into human behavior if you use it well. So being able to understand and learn that one approach is resonating more with people than another is actually a very powerful thing over time. I think the option, if you don't do this, some sort of experimentation, is you basically just make gut calls and you hope that you're right, and probably if you have kind of a lot of experience and expertise in your field, you will be right a lot of the time, but you won't know and you won't see what would have happened if you'd made the other call. So if you experiment, it allows you to build up that information of, okay, yes, this worked, but this one worked almost as well, and or this option didn't work at all. Think about why that is and those sorts of things. So A/B testing starts to unlock that, but kind of like I was saying, experimentation is a broader field than that, and we like to talk about dynamic experimentation, where your experiment kind of adjusts to the behavior of the people in the experiment as it's going on, in order to drop off some of the things that aren't working well and focus on things that are, and just learn faster and help you kind of focus and iterate more quickly. So generally in our dynamic experimentation cycle, you'll start with your kind of hypothesis steps. So, it's still, maybe as an example, I'll talk about, testing different marketing content. You still need a human to come up with a hypothesis to test and the options to test. I mean, we could now have an agentic structure set up to come up with different marketing content and push that content, but then you would need someone to set up the agent to do that. So you, at some level, are still going to need someone to configure, to have some sort of hypothesis of something that they want to build and test. So you'll come up with, let's say in the content example, say you have an offer that you want to talk about. You can come up with different versions of content for that offer. You then do your dynamic experiment configurations. So you'll set up the way that you want that experiment to run, how you want it to try and converge the historical data that you might want to use to give it kind of a warm start, all of those sorts of things. You'll then kind of integrate that into the, well, ideally you have an interface that allows you to integrate that experiment. So your front end has dynamic content or whatever it is, but if not, you'll have to come up with a way to expose that variable content to your customers. So that's, and I mean, there's a concept called dynamic design, where you allow that variability, enable that variability, so that there can be experimentation. And I'm sure there'll be a meetup on that at some point, but yeah, you need to have your technical side of it sorted out, and then you actually have your experiment set up and you look at the continuous performance of what's happening. So like we said, in the dynamic case, the experiment itself will track what is performing well, what isn't, and focus on areas where things are performing. But you can also monitor and see what's working well and learn based on that. And then this is a cycle, because then, if you've tested multiple options, and you can test multiple things at once as well, you can see what worked, what didn't, who was impacted by different things, and refine your hypotheses based on that. So one, just kind of the level of the experiment that you're in. So say you're looking at marketing content, you could start kind of focusing in on on specific types of content. So say you initially write some messages using a reciprocity construct, and some using a loss aversion, and some just using a kind of informative construct. You can see which one is performing the best, and then try variations within that construct in your next experiment and iterate based on that, and then also use that information to inform other decisions, dynamic design decisions you're making. So if reciprocity messages work well, what does that mean for everything else that you're doing in your customer engagement approach? So that's kind of how we think about experimentation. So it is quite a rigorous and scientific way of learning about your customers' behavior and how you can engage with them. But when it becomes particularly interesting is when you then combine it with some of the interaction science constructs that we've been talking about. So if you have a personality measure for people, so say you have the spend personality, you can use that then as part of your hypothesis construction and do your experiments incorporating that information and learning about it, and then validating both your constructs. And you can also then use that to validate your construct. So you could say, I've got the spend personality. I believe different messages will work well for different types of messages will work well for different personality types. So you set up an experiment to test that, and you can see that that potentially matches or doesn't your hypothesis, but you learn about which sorts of messages, engagements work well for different personality constructs. And we've seen that there is kind of quite a lot of variation in how people respond to engagements based on their personalities. And you can then, so you learn how to engage with people with different personalities, but it also will, if you then see that maybe a subgroup of people you've classified as experiential aren't behaving the way that you'd expect given everyone else, then you can use it to refine your social construct as well. So you can kind of do a kind of self-reinforcing experiment where you learn and improve on both at the same time. And we found that approach can give quite a deep understanding of the behavior of the people in your customer base and how best to engage with them.
It might be worthwhile, maybe just people a view on if you have a real-time kind of feedback system and you got reinforcement learning that gets your responses known in the moment versus the ones that are slightly delayed by, let's say, a day or two versus the ones that are long delayed, how that affects your ability to run an experiment.
Yeah. So I think basically, and it is a key part of it, even before getting into that, is I think a key part of being able to run an experiment is being able to define success and measure it, so get feedback on it. So if you are, in the example we spoke about, you looking at marketing content, like how are you measuring the success of that content? Is it generally, it would be click-through rates, but it could also be completion of a journey. So maybe it's more about, do you actually buy a product, or maybe it's about, do you go and visit a specific location, or there's a range of different ways that you can define success. And obviously you need that in order to run an experiment and know whether it's working, on whether things are, how well different options are working. The rate that you could get that feedback in obviously impacts how rapidly you can learn. So the ideal case is when you can present something and get feedback immediately, and then you can actually learn from each interaction. So if you can present things in real time and get feedback in real time, you can learn from every interaction that you have, which allows you to kind of learn as quickly as possible. There's a number of scenarios where that feedback loop slows down. So either you can't interact in real time, so potentially, the data you have available, or you have kind of technical constraints or whatever it is that doesn't allow you to do that. The second is that there might actually just be a built-in lag in your definition of success. So, like say you're trying to get someone to visit a specific location, you have to wait and see if they do end up visiting that location. You can't, they can't just be there immediately. It's not the same as clicking through on a message. And the same thing potentially for kind of purchasing a product. Although that would be like a smaller lag. Getting someone to go to a location, you probably have a lag over days. Getting someone to complete a journey is maybe minutes, hours, depending on how long the process is. And then there also might be lags in actually getting the data to measure that success. So it could be that your journey completion thing only updates at the end of every day, or a range of things like that. So that all of those things can have an impact on the speed of your feedback. But you can, as long as you're getting feedback, you can still learn. So as long as you can get feedback, it's still worth running experiments and using social constructs and learning based on those. The more real time your feedback is, the more rapidly you can learn, and the more effective your experiments will be. But if you have any lags, all it means is that you will engage with everyone based on your knowledge at a point in time until you get your feedback in and you update. So it just takes longer for things to go through. So yeah, kind of feedback and the feedback lags and the impact that it has. Yeah, so I don't know if there's, let me actually just go back to the session. If there's any other questions, I mean, we are kind of 10 minutes from the end, so we can also just end the session if no one has anything like to ask. And we can do more practical next time, because maybe this one was too theoretical based on the lack of questions. Cool.
No, I don't think there's any
Doesn't seem
questions.
there's anything else. So
Thanks, Eric and Jay. Thank you, guys.
Pleasure. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope it was interesting.
No, it was. Well, then we'll see everyone back here next week. For next week's, it's a webinar next week. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Eric. We'll see you all next week. Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.